The world seemed to stop as the massive German shepherd charged toward Emily's swollen belly, its teeth bared, snapping so close I could hear the chilling click of its jaws. My wife, 7 months pregnant, let out a scream that tore through my heart, her voice raw with terror as she stumbled backward. I lunged forward, arms outstretched, desperate to shield her from the beast's lethal advance. My name is Daniel Harper, a captain in our city's K-9 unit, and in that moment, every ounce of my training was focused on one thing: protecting Emily and our unborn child. Time slowed to a crawl, the scene unfolding like a nightmare in vivid detail. The dog's claws scraped against the concrete, its guttural growl vibrating through the air. My mind raced, grappling with a single, haunting question: how had our peaceful suburban life spiraled into this chaos? Just days ago, our neighborhood in Willow Creek, a quiet enclave of manicured lawns and friendly waves, felt like the perfect place to raise a family. Now, that illusion was shattering, torn apart by a force I hadn't seen: Kaminga neighbors' calculated malice. It all began 3 mornings earlier, on a crisp Tuesday in late spring. I was on our front porch, sipping coffee and glancing at the mailbox. I expected nothing more than the usual mix of bills and junk mail, but instead, I found a crisp envelope with an embossed seal from the Willow Creek Homeowners Association, HOA. The HOA was typically a minor nuisance: reminders to trim hedges or keep the grass neat, but this letter felt different. Its weight, the formal insignia, carried an air of authority that set my nerves on edge. As a K-9 captain, I was no stranger to official documents, but something about this one sent a chill down my spine. I slid my finger under the flap, bracing myself. The letter's language was polite but pointed, its message unmistakable. Dear Mr. Harper, we regret to inform you that your German shepherd, Titan, has been identified as a source of persistent barking and public disturbance in the neighborhood. It cited HOA codes, mentioned potential fines, and ended with a veiled threat: repeated infractions could incur significant penalties or escalation to legal proceedings. The signature was a flowing script: Ms. Vivian Caldwell, Enforcement Coordinator. Titan, our retired K-9 partner, barely barked unless a squirrel darted across the yard or a stranger lingered too long near our gate. The accusations didn't add up. I exhaled slowly, tension coiling in my shoulders. This wasn't a random complaint. It felt like a targeted move. Vivian Caldwell's name had surfaced before in neighborhood gossip: a woman rumored to wield her HOA authority like a weapon, punishing minor infractions with relentless zeal. I dismissed the stories as exaggerated, but now I wasn't so sure. Inside, Emily was curled up on the couch, flipping through a baby name book. Her face glowed with the quiet joy of impending motherhood, her hands resting gently on her belly. The nursery was nearly complete, painted in soft blues and yellows, with stuffed animals lining the shelves. She looked up as I entered, her smile fading when she saw my expression. "What's wrong, Dan?" she asked, her eyes flicking to the letter in my hand. "Trouble at work?" I sat beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "Not work," I said, handing her the document. "The HOA claims Titan's been barking up a storm. They're threatening fines." Emily's brows shot up. "That's absurd. Titan's quieter than most dogs on this street. He only barks if someone's at the door." I nodded, sharing her disbelief. We'd lived in Willow Creek for 5 years without a single complaint. This felt like it came out of nowhere, or worse, from someone with an agenda. I told Emily we'd keep an eye out for any strange developments. I wasn't about to let petty neighborhood politics disrupt our lives, especially with our baby due in 2 months. But as the day wore on, a nagging unease settled in my gut. That afternoon, I took Titan for a walk around the block. He trotted beside me, obedient as always, his ears perked but calm. As a K-9 officer, I'd trained dogs to sniff out drugs, track suspects, and protect lives. Titan was one of the best, and even in retirement, he was sharp and disciplined. As we passed a row of neatly trimmed lawns, I noticed a figure on a porch 2 houses down. A woman, mid-50s, with her hair pulled into a tight bun, stood with her arms crossed, watching us. Her gaze was cold, almost predatory, as if she were cataloging every step Titan took. I suspected it was Vivian Caldwell. We'd never met formally, but her expression screamed trouble. If Titan so much as tugged at his leash, I had no doubt she'd twisted into evidence of dangerous behavior. I kept my head high, guiding Titan forward without acknowledging her stare. That evening, as Emily and I chopped vegetables for dinner, the doorbell rang, sharp and jarring. Titan's ears flicked up, but he stayed silent, as was his nature. I exchanged a glance with Emily, who nodded for me to answer. At the door stood the same woman I'd seen earlier, holding a covered casserole dish with a floral pattern that clashed with her rigid posture. "Good evening, Mr. Harper," she said, her voice syrupy sweet. "I'm Vivian from the HOA. I heard you and your wife are expecting, so I brought a little welcome gift. A new baby is such a blessing." Her smile didn't reach her eyes, and I felt a prickle of unease. "Thank you. That's kind of you," I replied, taking the dish. Her eyes darted past me, as if trying to peer into our home. "It's a tradition of mine to bring my homemade chicken casserole to neighbors," she continued, her tone rehearsed. "I hope it's comforting, especially with a newborn on the way. Oh, and I did want to chat about your dog. This community values peace, you see, and some folks have complained about the barking." I kept my tone even. "I appreciate the gesture, Miss Caldwell. We got your letter, and we'll review it, but Titan isn't a nuisance. He's well trained." Her smile tightened, a flicker of irritation crossing her face. "I'm sure you believe that," she said, "but our guidelines are strict. As a law enforcement officer, I'm certain you understand the importance of rules." Her eyes lingered on the casserole dish, then met mine with a challenging glint. Emily appeared behind me, offering a polite smile. "That's very thoughtful of you," she said, though I could sense her discomfort. The conversation dragged on for a few more minutes, with Vivian reiterating the HOA's authority to impose fines or escalate matters. Then, with another forced smile, she turned and strode down our driveway, leaving a chill in her wake. Over the next 2 days, the pressure mounted. A second HOA letter arrived, this one threatening steeper fines if we didn't rectify Titan's alleged barking. A note pinned to our door claimed a neighbor had recorded Titan barking at odd hours. I started to wonder if we were being watched. Emily, deep in her 3rd trimester, grew anxious. "This was supposed to be a happy time," she said one evening, her voice trembling. "I'm starting to feel like we're not welcome here." I reassured her we'd handle it, but the situation was wearing on me too. As a cop, I'd mediated disputes far uglier than this, but Vivian's tactics felt personal, almost vindictive. Midweek, while I was raking leaves in the front yard, our elderly neighbor, Mrs. Clara Thompson, wandered over. Clara was a fixture in Willow Creek, known for her prize-winning roses and warm demeanor. "Afternoon, Daniel," she said, her eyes flicking to Titan, who sat calmly at my feet. "I saw Vivian snooping around earlier. Don't let her rattle you. She's been stirring up trouble for anyone who doesn't fit her idea of perfect." Clara's words carried weight. She leaned in, lowering her voice. "Word is, Vivian's got a chip on her shoulder. She never had kids of her own, and some say she can't stand seeing happy families thrive. You and Emily, with a baby on the way, got her sights on you." I thanked Clara for the heads up, though her warning deepened my unease. If Vivian's actions were driven by personal resentment, reasoning with her might be impossible. That night, Emily and I took our usual evening walk, hoping to clear our heads. The streetlights cast soft glows on the sidewalk, and the quiet of the evening was a brief reprieve. We spoke in hushed tones about the HOA mess, avoiding Vivian's house. But as we passed her property, a low growl rumbled from behind her fenced yard. 2 large dogs, their silhouettes muscular and alert, paced along the gate. Emily gripped my arm, her breath catching. "Since when does she have dogs?" she whispered. Vivian's porch light flicked on, and there she stood, her voice dripping with mock cheer. "Evening, Daniel. Lovely night, isn't it? I adopted a couple of guard dogs to keep intruders at bay." Her tone carried a sharp edge, and I forced a nod, guiding Emily across the street. My gut screamed that those dogs weren't just pets, they were a calculated threat, a new weapon in Vivian's arsenal. The next morning broke with a deceptive calm, the kind of bright spring day that made Willow Creek look like a postcard. I had the day off from the precinct and planned to finish painting a mural of stars in the nursery, a project Emily had been excited about for weeks. She was in the kitchen, humming softly as she sorted baby clothes, when a sharp clang echoed from the mailbox. Another envelope, this one stamped with the HOA seal in bold red ink. My stomach churned as I tore it open. Final notice, it read in stark letters. Your repeated violation of noise regulations has left the Willow Creek Homeowners Association no choice but to escalate this situation. If further incidents occur, daily financial sanctions will be imposed, and legal action may follow. Vivian Caldwell's signature sprawled across the bottom, her flourish dripping with authority. The words were cloaked in bureaucratic formality, but the hostility was clear. This wasn't about Titans barking, it was a personal attack. I marched inside, where Emily was reading over my shoulder, her hand instinctively resting on her baby bump. "This is insane, Dan," she said, her voice tight with worry. "We haven't done anything wrong." I nodded, anger simmering beneath my skin. We were being targeted, and I needed to figure out how far Vivian was willing to push this. I tried calling the HOA's general line, but a curt voice informed me Ms. Caldwell was unavailable, and that concerns should be submitted in writing. It was a brush-off, plain and simple. Emily suggested we talk to neighbors, hoping to gather statements that Titan wasn't the nuisance Vivian claimed. We knocked on a few doors that afternoon, and every neighbor we spoke to, families we'd shared barbecues and small talk with, confirmed they rarely heard Titan bark. "He's quieter than my terrier," one neighbor chuckled. Clara Thompson, our rose-loving friend, went further, offering to sign a sworn statement if needed. "But be careful, Daniel," she warned, her eyes serious. "Vivian doesn't back down. She's got a knack for retaliation." Clara's words echoed in my mind as the day wore on. People like Vivian, once fixated, were relentless. The more I dug, the clearer it became that her vendetta was rooted in something deeper than HOA rules. Maybe it was our pregnancy, the visible joy of our growing family, that had struck a nerve. That evening, just as dusk settled over Willow Creek, the doorbell rang again. My nerves were frayed, and I braced for another confrontation. Instead, it was a flustered neighbor from a few streets over, a woman named Linda who looked like she'd sprinted to our door. "Captain Harper," she gasped, spotting my badge on the hall table. "I'm sorry to barge in, but Vivian's new dog, one of those big German Shepherd mixes, nearly attacked my son today. It lunged at the fence while he was biking past. She's been parading those dogs around at odd hours, and she doesn't seem to care if they scare people." My chest tightened, a mix of anger and dread. "Thanks for letting me know," I said. "We'll keep an eye out." Linda's story confirmed my worst suspicions. Those dogs weren't just guard animals. They were tools of intimidation, extensions of Vivian's hostility. As a K-9 officer, I knew the dangers of poorly trained or deliberately provoked dogs. If Vivian was using them to terrorize the neighborhood, someone could get hurt. That night, Emily curled up against me in bed, her head on my shoulder. I felt her trembling. "I just want to feel safe here," she whispered. "This was supposed to be our home, the perfect place for our baby. Now I'm scared every time I step outside." I stroked her hair, swallowing my anxiety. "I'll protect you," I promised. "I'll do whatever it takes to stop this." Sleep eluded us both, my mind haunted by visions of Vivian's smirking face and the shadowy forms of her dogs. By morning, I was resolved to try one last diplomatic approach. If that failed, I'd escalate things through official channels, maybe even involve the precinct. Late that afternoon, I spotted Vivian by her mailbox, her posture as rigid as ever. Summoning every ounce of professionalism, I walked over and called out a greeting. She turned slowly, her lips curling into that taut, insincere smile. "You again, Mr. Harper? Any trouble?" Her voice dripped with mock concern. "Plenty, thanks to your latest letter," I replied, keeping my tone steady. "I'd like to settle this misunderstanding constructively. Titan isn't causing any issues, and we have neighbors who can back that up." She waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, I have proof, time-stamped audio, photographs. I'm sure you wouldn't question their authenticity. You may be a policeman, but that doesn't exempt you from our standards." My blood boiled, but I held my ground. Of course not. But fabricating complaints or exaggerating Titan's barking to bully us is unacceptable. My wife's pregnant and want peace as much as anyone. Her gaze flicked toward our house, lingering on the nursery window. "Yes, your wife," she said, her tone icy. "Such an exciting milestone. I wonder if you'll keep that dog once the baby arrives. It might be safer to rehome him." The chill in her eyes hinted at a deeper motive, and I realized she wasn't just targeting Titan, she wanted us broken or gone. Our exchange ended with me walking away, fists clenched. Vivian didn't raise her voice or make overt threats, but her cold stare spoke volumes. I felt like I'd stepped into a psychological battlefield, each move calculated to wear us down. Part of me wanted to call a lawyer or file a harassment complaint, but without concrete proof of her manipulation, it was a risky move. That night, Clara stopped by with a tin of homemade cookies, her face etched with concern. "I've heard more about Vivian," she said softly. "Years ago, she was pregnant, but she lost the baby. Since then, she's been bitter, especially toward families. She once called children's laughter a reminder of what she was robbed of." Clara's story stirred a pang of sympathy, but it didn't excuse Vivian's actions. Grief could twist a person, but her calculated harassment was something else, a darkness that felt deliberate. "She's dangerous, Daniel," Clara added, her voice trembling. "Be careful." Her warning lingered as Emily and I tried to reclaim some normalcy. The next morning, Emily insisted on another walk, craving fresh air to ease her stress. I was hesitant, but I couldn't keep her cooped up forever. Titan trotted beside us, his tail swishing, as we looped through the neighborhood under a warm sun. As we neared Vivian's property, my heart sank. There she stood at her gate, her two German Shepherd mixes pacing behind the bars. Their hackles were raised, low snarls rumbling in their throats. Emily's grip tightened on my arm. I glared at Vivian. "Is there a need to parade them like that?" I asked, my voice sharp. She feigned innocence. "They need fresh air. Don't worry, they're secure." But her hand hovered near the gate's latch, and a peculiar smile played on her lips. "Care for some lemonade on my porch? We could discuss neighborly harmony." Every instinct screamed that this was a trap. Refusing might escalate her vendetta, but accepting felt like walking into a lion's den. I glanced at Emily, who bit her lip but gave a slight nod. We followed Vivian up her walkway, dread pooling in my gut. She gestured to two wicker chairs on her porch, and we sat cautiously, her dogs lingering at the far end, their eyes locked on us, especially Emily's midsection. Vivian poured lemonade, her movements deliberate, as she asked about our due date and baby names. Emily answered politely, but her voice wavered. I took a sip of the lemonade, too tense to taste it. The scene felt staged, every detail from the bright picture to Vivian's forced chatter designed to unsettle us. Then, abruptly, she stood, tugging the dogs' leashes closer. "They're restless," she said, making a show of their agitation. "I'll let them roam the backyard. It's not healthy to keep them tied up." My pulse spiked. I knew K-9 body language, coiled tension, pinned ears. "That might not be wise," I said carefully. "They don't seem fully trained." Vivian flashed that chilling grin. "I know my animals. No one else should worry, right?" With a swift motion, she unclipped both leashes. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Then the dogs bolted, snarling, their sights set on Emily. The moment Vivian unclipped the leashes, the world exploded into chaos. The two German Shepherd mixes surged forward, their snarls ripping through the air, eyes locked on Emily's pregnant belly. Instinct took over. As a K-9 captain with years of training, I knew how to handle an attack, but this was personal. Me wife, my unborn child, were in the crosshairs. I lunged in front of Emily, barking a sharp command. "Down. Back off." My voice carried the authority I'd honed over countless high-stakes operations. But these dogs were driven by something feral, egged on by Vivian's twisted intent. One dog hesitated for a fraction of a second, its ears twitching at my command, but the other didn't slow. It launched itself toward Emily's legs, teeth bared. I thrust my arms out, feeling the hot sting of fangs sinking into my forearm. Blood welled instantly, soaking my sleeve, but I barely registered the pain. Emily screamed, her voice a raw plea as she stumbled toward the porch steps, clutching her belly. The second dog circled, seeking an opening to get past me. I roared another command, this time in German Platz, hoping to override their aggression. The circling dog faltered, confused, but the one clamped onto my arm only tightened its grip. Vivian stood at the edge of the porch, her face pale but oddly transfixed, as if she hadn't expected the violence to erupt so fiercely, yet wasn't entirely displeased. Time compressed, the world narrowing to the snap of teeth and Emily's terrified sobs. My training kicked in like muscle memory. I shoved the attacking dog with my free hand, trying to pry its jaws loose. Pain flared as its teeth tore deeper, but I managed to loosen its hold. The second dog lunged again, snapping near my thigh. I kicked out not to harm, but to keep its muzzle at bay. "Emily, call 911. I shouted, my voice hoarse. She fumbled for her phone, tears streaming down her face as she backed toward the steps. Vivian hovered, unmoving, her eyes gleaming with a strange satisfaction. Whether she meant for this carnage or simply wanted us terrified, the scene had spiraled into a maelstrom of violence. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Either Emily had reached the dispatcher, or a neighbor had heard the commotion. The dogs paced, their aggression wavering as the approaching chaos disrupted their focus. With every shred of my will, I kept my body between them and Emily, my injured arm throbbing. A patrol car screeched around the corner, and 2 officers jumped out, guns drawn but angled downward to avoid provoking the dogs further. I recognized them from the precinct officer Jenna Brooks and her partner, Tom Rivera. "Captain Harper," Jenna called, shock flashing across her face as she saw my blood-soaked sleeve. "Stand back," I rasped. "These dogs are highly aggressive." Vivian snapped out of her trance, her voice suddenly shrill. "It was an accident. The leashes malfunctioned." Her words rang hollow, fooling no one. Tom moved swiftly, escorting Emily to the safety of the patrol car. I forced another command at the dogs, my voice steady despite the pain. The second dog whimpered, backing off slightly, but the first still snarled, battered by conflicting signals, me authority versus Vivian's incitement. Another squad car arrived, this one carrying an officer with a catchpole from animal control. Drawing on every ounce of my K-9 expertise, I coaxed the snarling dog into a corner, my commands sharp and relentless. After a tense standoff, we secured both animals, avoiding further bloodshed. By now, half the neighborhood had gathered, drawn by the sirens and shouting. Vivian stood trembling, as if finally grasping the magnitude of what she'd unleashed. Jenna read her Miranda rights, snapping handcuffs around her wrists as Vivian sputtered. "I never meant for this." They weren't supposed to attack. But the onlookers, including Clara Thompson, stared at her with horrified disbelief. Clara stepped forward, her voice steady. "I saw her unclip those leashes on purpose. She wanted to scare them, maybe worse." Paramedics rushed to my side, examining my wounds. The bites were deep, requiring stitches and a tetanus shot, but I waved off their insistence that I sit. Emily, safe but shaking, burst into tears at the sight of my torn arm. "I'm so sorry, Dan," she sobbed, blaming herself for not doing more. I pulled her close, ignoring the pain. "I'd do it again to keep you and our baby safe," I said, my voice firm. Officers took statements from neighbors, many of whom had heard the dog's snarls and Emily's screams. Clara's testimony was damning, confirming Vivian's deliberate act. As the adrenaline faded, a deep, trembling rage pulsed through me. I'd faced criminals in my career, but this betrayal, at our doorstep, in a neighborhood we'd chosen for its peace, cut deeper. The police report listed deliberate endangerment, assault, and reckless handling of dangerous animals. Animal control loaded Vivian's dogs into a van, their muzzles stained with my blood. Another wave of nausea hit me, but Emily steadied me as a paramedic cleaned my wounds. We sat on the ambulance steps, arms wrapped around each other, our hearts still pounding. Neighbors approached, offering words of support. Clara placed a gentle hand on Emily's shoulder, tears in her eyes. "I'm so sorry you went through this," she said. "You need to rest, dear." Emily nodded, leaning into me. Through the haze of pain and fury, a strange relief settled in. Vivian's reign of terror was over. She could no longer hide behind HOA rules to harass us. The next few days were a blur. My arm required stitches and a sling, but I refused to let it slow me down. Emily, though physically unharmed, was shaken. Her trust in our neighborhood was shattered. We provided detailed statements to the detectives, who were building a strong case against Vivian. The HOA, scrambling to distance itself from the scandal, called an emergency meeting. They expelled Vivian from her enforcement role, and neighbors took the floor to share their own stories of her intimidation. One man, a retiree named George, revealed how Vivian had threatened to report him to city officials over a minor fence violation. A young couple described her baseless threats of lawsuits over their holiday decorations. The board, red-faced, apologized for failing to curb her abuse of power. Vivian faced charges of aggravated assault and endangering a pregnant woman. Her attorney tried to spin a defense of mental instability, citing her tragic loss of a child years ago, but the evidence was overwhelming. Her actions were too calculated to dismiss as a breakdown. We learned more about her tactics in the days that followed. Vivian had recorded Titan's occasional barks normal dog behavior and spliced them into a continuous loop, presenting it to HOA members as proof of a dangerous beast. Her plan had backfired spectacularly, exposing her manipulation to the entire neighborhood. Those who'd stayed silent out of fear now spoke up, grateful her tyranny was over. Emily and I began to heal, though the scars ran deep. Titan, thankfully, was unscathed, his calm demeanor a comfort amid the chaos. I refused to let Vivian's hatred define our future. We installed security cameras around our home, both for peace of mind and to document any future threats. The innocence of Willow Creek was tainted, but each time I saw Emily's gentle smile or felt our baby kick against her belly, I knew we'd persevere. The neighborhood rallied around us. Clara brought over casseroles, and other neighbors dropped off cards and baby gifts. At the next HOA meeting, a new committee expressed regret for Vivian's unchecked behavior and vowed better oversight. I proposed stricter rules for large dog ownership, mandatory training, and clear guidelines to prevent anyone else from weaponizing pets. The room nodded in agreement, the memory of Vivian's dogs still fresh. A month later, the community felt different, more united. Clara, tending her roses, often stopped to chat. "I'm proud of this neighborhood," she said one afternoon. "You and Emily showed everyone what courage looks like." Emily, standing beside me, rested a hand on her belly and smiled. "Our baby's going to have one heck of a story," she said softly. I felt a surge of gratitude that she and our child were safe, but the ordeal had changed me. As a K-9 officer, I was used to danger, but this was the first time I'd felt truly vulnerable in my own home. As the weeks passed, Willow Creek began to feel like home again, though the echoes of Vivian Caldwell's vendetta lingered like a faint scar. Emily and I focused on the future, pouring our energy into preparing for our baby's arrival. The nursery was complete, its starlit mural a quiet testament to our resilience. Titan, ever the loyal companion, padded through the house with his usual calm, unfazed by the chaos that had unfolded. Yet, beneath the surface, I couldn't shake the wariness that had taken root. I'd faced danger in my career, but this betrayal at the heart of our sanctuary had shifted something fundamental in me. Emily, now 8 months pregnant, was physically unharmed but emotionally fragile. She'd wake in the night, startled by dreams of snarling dogs, and I'd hold her until her trembling stopped. "I just want to feel normal again," she'd whisper, her voice heavy with the weight of what we'd endured. I promised her we'd get there, but I knew it would take time. The neighborhood support helped. Clara Thompson became a regular visitor, her warm presence a balm for Emily's nerves. Other neighbors stopped by with small gestures, homemade pies, handwritten notes, each act reinforcing that we weren't alone. The HOA, under new leadership, worked to rebuild trust. At their second meeting post-incident, they unveiled stricter oversight policies and a clear process for handling complaints, ensuring no one could exploit the system as Vivian had. I spoke at the meeting, advocating for responsible pet ownership rules, drawing on my K-9 expertise. "Large breeds need training and accountability," I said, my voice steady. "We can't let personal grudges turn animals into weapons." The room erupted in applause, a sign that Willow Creek was ready to move forward. But Vivian's shadow loomed larger than I'd expected. Through the precinct grapevine, I learned she was fighting her charges with a vigor that surprised even the detectives. Her attorney leaned heavily on her past trauma, the loss of her unborn child decades ago, claiming it had triggered a mental breakdown. The argument didn't erase the evidence. Clara's testimony, the neighbors' accounts, the spliced audio she'd used to frame Titan. Still, the idea that she might evade full accountability gnawed at me. Justice, I'd learned, wasn't always as clean as a conviction. One crisp morning, as I was checking the security cameras we'd installed, Clara ambled over, her gardening gloves tucked under her arm. "I heard Vivian's appealing her case," she said, her brow furrowed. "She's claiming she was delusional, that she never meant harm. Can you believe it?" I shook my head, frustration bubbling up. She knew exactly what she was doing. Those dogs didn't unclip themselves. Clara nodded, her eyes distant. Some folks cling to their pain like a lifeline. It twists them. But you and Emily are stronger than that. Her words stayed with me as I drove to the precinct that afternoon. My arm, still bandaged from the bites, ached under the sling, but I was cleared for light duty. Colleagues greeted me with a mix of admiration and concern, having heard about the porch attack. You took on 2 shepherds to protect your wife. Officer Jenna Brooks said, shaking her head. That's next level, Captain. I shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. Just doing what any husband would. But the truth was, the incident had left me hypervigilant, scanning every corner for threats. Back home, Emily was determined to reclaim her sense of normalcy. She insisted on resuming our evening walks, though we avoided Vivian Street. Titan trotted beside us, his presence a quiet comfort. One evening, as we passed Clara's rose garden, Emily paused, her hand on her belly. I felt a strong kick, she said, a smile breaking through her lingering unease. This baby's a fighter like you. I kissed her forehead, grateful for these small moments of joy amid the storm. But the storm wasn't over. A week later, a registered letter arrived from Vivian's attorney, addressed to both me and Emily. My heart sank as I opened it. The letter was a formal request for us to consider dropping our statements, citing Vivian's fragile mental state, and offering a financial settlement for my medical bills. It was framed as a gesture of goodwill, but the subtext was clear. She wanted a way out. Emily read it over my shoulder, her face hardening. She thinks she can buy her way out of this. After what she did. I crumpled the letter, my jaw tight. She's desperate. This won't change the evidence. But the audacity of the move reignited my anger. Vivian had orchestrated a violent attack, and now she was playing the victim. I called the lead detective, who assured me the case was airtight. Her lawyer's fishing, he said. The judge won't buy this sob story, not with your injuries and the witness statements. Still, the letter felt like a violation, another attempt to invade our peace. The next day, I met with Clara and a few neighbors to discuss the development. George, the retiree who'd faced Vivian's threats before, was livid. She's been bullying this neighborhood for years, and now she's pulling this? We need to stand firm. Linda, whose son had been terrorized by Vivian's dogs, agreed. If she gets off, what's to stop her from coming after someone else? Their resolve strengthened mine. We agreed to submit a collective letter to the court, reaffirming our testimonies and urging accountability. As Emily's due date approached, the tension in our home eased slightly, replaced by the nervous excitement of impending parenthood. We packed a hospital bag, attended birthing classes, and debated names Sophie for a girl, Ethan for a boy. But Vivian's looming trial cast a shadow. The court date was set for early summer, just weeks after Emily was due. I wanted it behind us, but I knew the process could drag on, especially with her appeal. One afternoon, while I was at the precinct reviewing K-9 training logs, Jenna pulled me aside. Got a tip from animal control, she said. Vivian's dogs were evaluated. They're aggressive, likely untrained, and provoked. They're recommending euthanasia, but her lawyer's fighting it, saying it's part of her defense. My stomach twisted. Those dogs were victims of Vivian's manipulation, but their attack had nearly cost us everything. What's your take, Captain? Jenna asked. I sighed. They're a danger, but it's not their fault. Vivian's the real threat. That evening, I shared the news with Emily, who was folding tiny onesies on the couch. Her face softened with conflicted sympathy. Those poor dogs, she said. She turned them into monsters. I nodded, grappling with the moral grayness. Vivian's actions had ripple effects, harming not just us but the animals she'd used as tools. It was a stark reminder of how resentment could poison everything it touched. The following week brought a new surprise. Clara called me over as I mowed the lawn, her face pale. You need to see this, she said, handing me her phone. It was a local news article, posted online, detailing Vivian's case. The headline read, Suburban woman claims mental breakdown in dog attack case. The story painted her as a grieving recluse, driven to desperation by her tragic past. Our names weren't mentioned, but the article described a pregnant couple and a K-9 officer, making it clear who we were. Worse, it quoted neighbors none we recognized who called Vivian misunderstood and harmless. She's spinning the narrative, Clara said, her voice shaking. This could sway the court. I felt a surge of outrage. Vivian was weaponizing public sympathy, just as she'd weaponized her dogs and the HOA. I called our lawyer, a no-nonsense woman we'd hired to navigate the case. "This is a PR stunt," she said. "The judge will focus on evidence, not sob stories. But we'll counter with a statement if it escalates." Emily, when I told her, was furious. "She's trying to make us the villains. After everything." The article sparked heated debates online, with some commenters defending Vivian's trauma and others condemning her as a menace. It was exactly the kind of controversy that could divide a community, and I worried it would erode the support we'd built. But Willow Creek surprised me. At a neighborhood barbecue hosted by Linda, neighbors rallied around us. "We know the truth," George said, raising a glass. "She can't rewrite what we saw." Clara added, "That woman's lies won't hold up. Not with all of us standing together." As Emily's due date neared, we tried to focus on the joy ahead. One evening, as we sat on our porch, Titan at our feet, Emily looked out at the street, now peaceful under the streetlights. "I'm starting to feel safe again," she said, her hand resting on mine. "It's been a long road, but we're almost there." I squeezed her hand, hoping she was right. But deep down, I knew Vivian's final reckoning was still to come, and it would test us one last time. The summer sun hung low over Willow Creek, casting golden light across our porch as Emily and I stood together, cradling our newborn daughter, Sophie. She was born just days before Vivian Caldwell's trial, a tiny beacon of hope amid the storm that had tested our resilience. Holding her, feeling her soft breaths against my chest, I was reminded of how close we'd come to losing everything. The scars on my arm, still tender from the dog bites, were a daily reminder of that harrowing day on Vivian's porch. But as Sophie's eyes fluttered open, I knew we'd emerge stronger, our family forged in the crucible of adversity. Vivian's trial began on a humid morning in early July, the courthouse a stark contrast to the quiet streets of Willow Creek. Emily and I sat in the gallery, Sophie nestled in a carrier beside us, as the prosecution laid out a meticulous case. They presented Clara Thompson's testimony, the neighbors' accounts, and the damning evidence of Vivian's spliced audio recordings, which had falsely painted Titan as a menace. My medical records, detailing the deep bite wounds, were displayed on a screen, drawing gasps from the jury. The prosecutor's voice was steady. Ms. Caldwell orchestrated a deliberate attack, exploiting her authority and her animals to terrorize a pregnant woman and her husband. Vivian's defense leaned heavily on her past tragedy, painting her as a broken woman driven to irrationality by the loss of her unborn child. Her attorney called a psychologist who spoke of grief-induced instability, arguing that Vivian hadn't intended harm. But the evidence was overwhelming. Clara's account of Vivian unclipping the dog's leashes was corroborated by another neighbor who'd seen the incident from across the street. The spliced audio, analyzed by an expert, was exposed as a calculated fabrication. Even Vivian's attempt to sway public opinion with the news article backfired, as the judge dismissed it as irrelevant. When Vivian took the stand, her demeanor was a mix of defiance and feigned remorse. "I never meant for anyone to get hurt," she said, her voice trembling. "The leashes slipped, and I was overwhelmed. My past has haunted me." But her eyes, cold and calculating, betrayed her words. During cross-examination, the prosecutor pressed her on the audio recordings and the threatening HOA letters. Vivian faltered, her answers evasive, and the jury's faces hardened. Emily gripped my hand, her breath uneven. "She's lying," she whispered. "She wanted us to suffer." The trial lasted 3 days, each one a grueling reminder of the fear and pain we'd endured. On the final day, as the jury deliberated, Emily and I waited in a quiet courthouse hallway, Sophie dozing in her carrier. Clara joined us, her presence a steadying force. "Justice will come," she said, her voice firm. "She can't twist the truth forever." Hours later, the verdict was announced: guilty on charges of aggravated assault, endangering a pregnant woman, and reckless handling of dangerous animals. The courtroom was silent as Vivian was led away in handcuffs, her face a mask of disbelief. The judge sentenced her to 3 years in prison, with mandatory psychiatric evaluation and restitution for my medical costs. As she was escorted out, Vivian turned briefly, her eyes meeting mine. For a moment, I saw not just malice, but a flicker of something broken, a woman consumed by her pain. I didn't revel in her downfall, but I felt a quiet satisfaction. Justice had been served, not with fanfare, but with the steady weight of truth. Emily leaned into me, tears of relief in her eyes. "It's over, Dan," she said. "We can finally move on." The aftermath brought a sense of closure, though not without complexity. Vivian's dogs, deemed irredeemably aggressive due to her neglect and provocation, were euthanized, a decision that weighed heavily on me. As a K-9 officer, I knew dogs could be shaped by their handlers, and those animals had been victims of Vivian's cruelty. Yet their attack had nearly cost us our family, and public safety came first. The neighborhood held a quiet memorial for the dogs, organized by Linda, a gesture that acknowledged their tragic role in the saga. Willow Creek transformed in the months that followed. The HOA, chastened by the scandal, implemented reforms that prioritized transparency and fairness. Neighbors who'd once stayed silent now spoke up, forming a tighter community bound by a shared resolve to prevent another Vivian. Clara, ever the neighborhood's heart, hosted a block party to celebrate Sophie's arrival, with tables of food and kids playing tag under the shade of oak trees. Emily and I sat with Sophie, now smiling and cooing, as neighbors shared stories and laughter. It was a stark contrast to the fear that had once shadowed our streets. One neighbor, George, approached me during the party, his expression earnest. "Captain, I owe you an apology," he said. "I should have spoken up about Vivian sooner, but I was afraid. You stood up to her, protected your family, and showed us what courage looks like." I shook his hand, moved by his words. "Fear can paralyze anyone," I said. "What matters is that we're stronger now." The party stretched into the evening, a testament to Willow Creek's renewal. Sophie's first months were a blur of sleepless nights and joyful milestones. Titan, ever gentle, would perk his ears at her cries but never showed a hint of aggression. He'd lie by her crib, a silent guardian, and I'd smile at the bond forming between them. My arm healed, though the scars remained, a physical reminder of what we'd overcome. I returned to full duty at the precinct, my colleagues joking that I'd earned a combat badge for surviving Vivian's dogs. But the experience had deepened my perspective, reminding me that danger could lurk not just in dark alleys, but in quiet suburbs. Through the grapevine, we heard Vivian was struggling in prison, her appeals denied. Some neighbors speculated she'd never heal from her bitterness, but I chose not to dwell on her fate. She'd made her choices, and we'd made ours to live fully, to raise Sophie with love, to rebuild our trust in Willow Creek. The security cameras stayed up, a practical precaution, but our porch became a place of solace again, where we'd sit with Sophie, watching the sunset and breathing in the calm. One evening, as autumn leaves began to fall, Clara stopped by with a bouquet of her prize roses. "These are for Sophie," she said, her eyes twinkling. "That girl's got a warrior for a father and a rock for a mother." Emily blushed, cradling Sophie. "We had a lot of help," she said, glancing at Clara. I nodded, gratitude swelling in my chest. "We couldn't have done it without this neighborhood," I said. "You all reminded us what community means." Looking back, the ordeal with Vivian was a crucible that tested our limits, but also revealed our strength. We'd faced a neighbor's hatred, a calculated campaign that nearly shattered our peace, and emerged not just intact but fortified. The lessons were hard-won. Cherish what matters, guard it fiercely, and never underestimate the power of unity. Willow Creek wasn't perfect, but it was ours, a place where we'd chosen to raise Sophie, believing in the goodness that could rise from conflict. As I held Emily's hand that night, Sophie sleeping against my chest, I felt an unshakable peace. The doorbell, once a harbinger of dread, now brought neighbors with smiles or delivery drivers with packages. We'd reclaimed our home, our future, and our faith in humanity. Vivian's darkness had licked at our door, but it hadn't consumed us. Instead, it had ignited a light, a community united, a family unbroken, and a story of courage that would shape Sophie's legacy. A note to readers: thank you for joining us on this journey through Daniel and Emily's harrowing ordeal. Their story raises tough questions about violence, injustice, and the ripple effects of personal pain. What are your thoughts on Vivian's actions? Can grief ever justify such cruelty, or was her vendetta unforgivable? How would you handle a neighbor's malice in your community? Share your opinions in the comments below. I'd love to hear your perspective and discuss what justice means to you. Your voice matters, so let's keep the conversation going.